There are great humans in this world. There are great people, and they want to support you. And so I think by sharing your story in some way, whether it's a post on a social media app, or it's a journal maybe that you share with others, or whatever that is for you, I think allowing people into your story is very important, because people can now pray for you. They can bring you meals. You maybe talked about this. They can bring you underwear to the hospital if you need it. Yes. Maybe that's another story for another time on another podcast episode. But I know it happened and it's true. But I think it's important that you let people into your life. And so I think by sharing your story to some degree is it's an important part of the human existence.
This is NICU Babies Parent Support with Kathryn Whitaker, a podcast from Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit that provides free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a NICU stay. My conversations here focus on education and personal stories with medical and hospital professionals, counselors, therapists, and NICU moms and dads from across the country. So whether you're preparing for a NICU stay, you're currently there, or you're months and years past your stay, you belong here. The NICU is hard. We're here to help. I'm your host, Kathryn Whitaker, the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby, and I'm so grateful that you're here. Well, normally I have a big fancy introduction, but the big introduction is this is our 100th episode, y'all. 100 episodes. What a resource for y'all if you're listening. There are 99 other episodes that you can listen to, that you can glean great wisdom from and great information from, hear amazing stories, feel encouraged, even on your hardest days. And I hope that you'll take some time to go back and listen to some of our favorites. But I'm really darn excited that we hit, now we're triple digits from here on out. You know, it's nowhere to go but up. So we've got 100 episodes today, and selfishly, I invited my very favorite guest ever. My husband is coming back. So last time in 2023, last season, I visited with him on episode 72, and y'all loved him so much that I brought him back, and I felt like it was appropriate to have him here for the 100th episode. So I think you're going to love this one. We talk a little bit about how we navigated sharing our family story in a social setting, not just with our friends and family, but out on the internets. And how did we find appropriate boundaries, but also how did we make decisions, particularly when it came to his medical care, and just some really great encouragement. As a matter of fact, you're really, really going to love the last piece of advice that he gives. So with that, let's chat to my favorite guest. Well, I don't always get to have my very, very, very favorite guest on the podcast, but today I do. My husband is here. Hey, babe.
Hey, how are you? I love
I'm
it.
good.
I'm your very, 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 very favorite guest.
I am. Yep. I love having you on here because it feels a little bit more, I don't know. I know what I can ask you and what I can't ask you, I guess.
There are no sacred cows in our relationship.
Oh, we have talked about it all. Well, I had you on here because you and I did an episode last year. I think it was episode 72, where we talked about marriage counseling and why it was such a beneficial thing for us after our son was in the NICU, and kind of what led us to the door of the therapist office and kind of the benefits of being there. And everyone loved you. I got to be honest. I mean, I think they like me, but I think they really love you. Yeah. So I felt like having you back this season would be a gift to the people who listen to the podcast. And I really wanted us to talk about, the whole season has been like life after a NICU admission, like the toolbox that people need, maybe the topics that are sort of bubbling up to the top that they're having to deal with. And you came to mind just because there were a lot of things that we had to navigate as a couple when it came to Luke being in the NICU and then certainly post NICU. So maybe we'll start with social media and just the sharing of the story. I think like we have to give people some context. So this was back in 2009. Facebook is around. I thought Instagram was a photo editing app. So definitely a different landscape social media wise back then. But we had a desire to share with people. People were asking like what's going on, and we certainly didn't have the bandwidth to like call everyone back. But I don't know, how do you think we handled that sharing of information, and how did we decide like what to share, what not to share publicly and then also with people in our real life? I don't know. I'm gonna let you answer that.
You are really testing me to go back about 14
I
plus
know.
years now.
I know.
Oh my goodness. No, we've talked about this, so a little prepared, but yeah, I just go back to that time. I mean, it was a different time in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, goodness, the you think about social media, you think about, I mean, iPhones just really coming on, smartphones coming into the market, and it was just it was a different time and a place and a different world. And I mean, we talk about that. All of our children they're going to have different experiences with phones and social media and technology from our oldest to our youngest over that span of time. So, I mean, just going back and just thinking about what was it like in
Don't make us sound old
2009,
though. Make us sound young.
right? Well, it's like telling our kids that hanging up the phone or the dial, or we had to punch the buttons or call waiting. Oh my gosh, that's not quite that far back, but
All
pretty
right.
close. Yeah, I think that was something that we were looking for a way to keep Luke's story there, and I think it wasn't necessarily we went into telling Luke's story. I think, if I recall, that it was really more about how do I journal
Mhm.
and how do I keep the story in mind of what's going on with Luke so I don't forget this moment in time. And I think it was you, and perhaps that's really the issue, not so much social media or technology or websites and telling the story, but it's more about what does it mean to you to journal, to remember that story so that you might you might be able to tell that story to your child another day. So I think that's where we started. That's where we kind of went into this moment um, more than anything else. It wasn't so much of telling the story through social media.
I think when we were doing it, I was just trying to keep people informed. It wasn't until months and years later that I would go back and read. Back then I had a blog and those posts aren't there anymore, but for a while
You
they
just,
were. And
you just said blog.
I know,
You're going to
stop it.
date yourself again.
But it was a really great place for me to go back and read and be the rawness of what we were dealing with. And while I didn't share it all, I remember writing those words and I remember how raw it felt. And I remember holding back on some things, but I remember what I really wanted to say and what I did say. And now that our son is a teenager, God bless it, and he's going to be in high school in the fall, it sort of takes on a new conversation with him because yeah, that's what you and I were feeling, but now he's old enough to know and own his story, and so how do we turn that over to him, while also protecting his privacy? Back, I think if a NICU parent's listening to this today and their baby's just been in the NICU or they're recently out of the NICU, social media is a very different landscape than it was, and journaling and all that is a very different landscape. So maybe asking the question, am I writing it down in the right place? Should this be public? Because I think there's some real benefits to writing it down, whether that's on a computer or in a journal, because you have to get it out. And then also, it can be invaluable for your kid as they get older, that you can sort of relive what we went through, but with perspective, so that you can pass that on to them, can be really valuable. It was hard though, babe. I remember being worried about should we pull the curtain back this far and let people see, because this is a hella hard place to be and I'm not sure that people are ready to see that.
Yeah, no, it's just the thought that kind of came to me just chatting this morning with you is that the first step really is journaling, keeping the story for yourself as maybe as parents or for a mom or a dad, that's an important thing. But the second thing I think is important as well is you're asking the question, how much do we share? How much do we pull back the curtain? I do think there is value in sharing stories with other NICU parents. And I think that's why this podcast is so good and so popular, because it really does kind of break open that you're not alone. And so maybe just by telling that story through social media, it might just connect you with somebody else. It might just connect you with someone else who's struggling with the same thing, and that you're not alone. And so I think there's beauty in sharing the story through social media. We all know the negative impacts that come with that too. There's all that comes with it. But I don't know. I think that's something that really strikes me, is that by listening to these podcasts, by sharing that story publicly, it does allow people to know that they're not alone, and that there's somebody else there for them.
Yeah, and I think at least in the last couple of years, I think what I've shifted away from is telling less about maybe the details of what we're going through, but the overarching feeling that I have, and also my portion of the story. I mean, the unique thing is that whenever you're in a relationship with someone or you're related to them and you start to tell a story about them, inevitably bits and pieces of their story are interwoven into yours, because we don't live our life, singularly. But what I had to do was start to extract what were some of the personal things, or some of the things that are private to them, and then what's my story. What I think I was thinking about this because the other day it was a learning opportunity for me. I posted a photo on social media of a space that was one of our kids' spaces, and they were not too happy that I had shared that without their permission. And to me, I was like, whatever, it wasn't that big of a deal. But then when I had the conversation with them, they were like, Mom, that actually, you should have asked me. And it gave me some pause to think, okay, so now that not only just because my kids are getting older, but when I share this, is there a line that I'm crossing? And how do I find that line? And it was a teachable moment. Sometimes our kids can teach us.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at that kid and said, you know what? You're right. I shouldn't have done that. I should have recognized. And so with our preemie and our NICU kid, I'm starting to think like, what's okay for me to share? Because I want people to feel seen. I want people to connect, but what crosses that line? And I think that's where we find ourselves in this new space, is where that line is always moving.
Yeah, definitely always moving, and just always, we're always learning about certainly social media, about technology. And again, it's so different from just from a little, and aside from a parenting standpoint, learning how to manage that from, in our case, a lot of children from oldest to youngest, it's going to be vastly different as well. But I think you said something that's probably important to remember is honoring and recognizing the space that you're for your children is important. And it's probably very good for them to understand that as well, that they know that they're honored and they're loved because you recognize the sacred space that they have. So I think that's an important component here as well. So it's good to learn from our kids every once in a while. We don't want to let them know too many times that
they're
we learn
great
from them.
teachers. They're very honest. They're my most valuable employees. They give very honest feedback about how I'm doing as their mom. Sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's not. But I think we always have to ask ourselves when they say something, even when it's out of anger, like, is there some truth to that? Let's dig through all the emotion and, the drama, and there's definitely some truth to that. So, babe, as I'm thinking about those first few months, so our son was critical. We had a lot of specialists, and we knew that there were some surgeries coming. There were a lot of decisions that we had to make as his parents, not just, what are we going to share publicly, but like, what are we going to do medically? Which specialist are we going to go see? Which course of action should we take? What medications should we stay away from or consider? And I remember feeling like that was a lot. I mean, maybe walk people through how we made some of those big decisions when there was not, I would say sometimes there was a clear cut answer. Yes, we should do this. No, we should not do that. But many times it was the specialists looking at us saying, what do you guys want to do? How did we figure that out? This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Be sure to download our app in the Apple Store or on Google Play, or you can visit our website to discover all the ways that we can support you as a NICU parent at handtohold.org. You can join one of our support groups, sign up for counseling, find loss and bereavement support, request a peer mentor, or check out our educational resources and family stories. And all of that is at no cost to you.
Gosh, that again, kind of going back so many years to think about what was that like. But the first thing that kind of strikes me is, again, early on in 2009, you think that was where you really started to get access to things outside of the doctors or the nurses or the people who were guiding you in the hospital. So I feel there was so many, at that time, there was a lot of competing noise, knowledge, things that were different. I guess the one thing that I remember is, family-centered care was kind of the buzzwords at that time, that we were going back to this idea of not only is the doctor have an opinion, the nurse has an opinion, the parents have an opinion, a say in the care of their child. So a lot of that, again, changes over that time period. But I feel like now I honestly don't know what I would do, because there is so much information available to a parent today. It's probably extremely overwhelming. And I think that's probably a big deal. So I guess for us, kind of going back, there was still a lot available, but there's got to be more today. Is every single day I felt like we were making decisions. We were trying to find time. And even within that, you had so much trauma. You had, there was fear, anxiety. Is Luke going to make it at all? We don't know. And so I think that was the hardest thing for us to really make time within the trauma, within the fear and the anxiety and the pressure. But just kind of keeping one foot in front of the other, always talking every day, checking in, little check-ins along the days, were what I remember as being helpful to us during that time, and kind of carving out a little bit of that every single day, knowing that it's going to be an incredibly difficult and challenging time.
Well, and I think there were some decisions that I'll use an example. This was years ago. We were with the specialist and they were recommending an intervention. And I remember I lobbied hard. I was like, no, I think that if we try harder, we can, avoid that surgery. And eventually she listened. I mean, it's not that she wasn't listening, but eventually she was like, all right, let's try it your way. And I can't tell you how many times I have gone back to that moment. I'm like, did we make the right decision? Should we have done that intervention? Should we have done that surgery? Would that have made things easier? So much second guessing. And, because one decision leads to another outcome, which leads to another, which leads to another decision, which may lead you to another specialist office, or maybe you get to leave a specialist office because you no longer need them. But it was this constant second guessing. And I remember there were a couple of people that we would turn to. One was other NICU parents that we knew that lived near us, that maybe were going through the same particular ailment that one of our kids was dealing with. And I'm like, man, I just need someone else that I know and I trust. And not that I always did exactly the path that they had done, but you and I it gave us, I think, some perspective to say, well, this family did this and this was the outcome and we really know them. So what do we think in our particular case? And then I think you and I just spent a lot of time talking about what our goals were for Luke and, financial component of what that meant for our family. We went into a lot of debt because of some of the decisions that we made, and I would not make them differently because they saved his life, but they were real. I mean, we really had to pay our bills and we really had to figure out a way. And I think it was through counseling and that we finally started to have some really honest conversations about, okay, this is hard. And I think we should go down this path, and then owning that decision of saying, we don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we're going to do it anyway because we believe it's the right thing to do. But it was really difficult to drown out the noise of well-intentioned friends and family that felt like we should do it one way, and what the medical community and our lived experience told us another way.
Yeah, to me, no doubt. I mean, you have friends and family, you have your own faith tradition that inspires you to make appropriate decisions related to your child. You have direct parents, grandparents, and in today's world, you have everything available to you at any point in time, anywhere on the internet. So you have so much available, and to drown out that noise, I think it's important for people listening to this podcast to kind of know that their child's journey, while it may match up with others, there might be others who have cardio issues, they have pulmonary issues or whatever. The reality is it's a pretty unique journey for their child. And I think the second guessing is really difficult for someone to do. Is like, oh my gosh, this person over here did this and this happened. And so I have this expectation that the same thing's going to happen to my child. And the reality of that is probably very, very minimal. It's not going to happen. Your child's journey is very unique in a way. So I think you make the best decisions with the best information from the doctors and nurses and caregivers in your world, in your time at that moment, and you go with it. And then you leave everything else to where it may go. And it's difficult because you really, really care for your child. You want what's best. You want them to make it. You want them to survive and thrive out of this first challenge presented to them in their life. But I think I don't want to lose this uniqueness to every child's journey. And it's really difficult. And maybe that's one of the problems, going back to the original idea of social media, is that we compare a lot to other children's journeys or other parents' journeys. And you see those. And you expect those same types of outcomes or how things go. It's not necessarily the case. So I don't know, hope that helps some people listening today.
Well, and I think for you and I, thank you for saying that. I mean, it is truly, our lives are unique. So it makes perfect sense that our children's lives and their trajectory would also be unique. I think we relied pretty heavily on our pediatrician, who at that time had known our family for, oh my gosh, 15 years, 14
Long
years,
time,
a
right?
long time. And we really relied on her. I mean, she was a former attending at the hospital, went into private practice. And so I remember there was a day that she came up to the hospital just to see Luke. And I remember, one, feeling super loved that our pediatrician made the time to come up there. He was pretty critical, but also that she knew our family. She knew what was important to us. She knew that I was kind of like a mama bear, and that I wasn't going to just settle for someone saying this is the way that you should do it. She knew that you and I had a good partnership and that we were making decisions together. And I really think that really formed her advice to us because she knew our family. And then the second person was obviously our developmental pediatrician, who was seeing things sort of on an accelerated level from our pediatrician. But I think it really helped to have someone, because some of those specialists were rolling in and out of our life, for a year or two, or maybe 5 or 10 years. But she was the one that had been constant, and she knew us before Luke, and she has known us, after that, when the next baby came along. And man, I trusted her with his life, really. And I think you're right. She knew the most about us. It wasn't some random doctor. Not that they're not great on the internet, but this was a doctor that really knew us and knew our situation and knew the world and Austin and you and I. And I think that made a big difference.
Yeah, and I often think about those people who perhaps they do not have a partner in life to bounce ideas off. Perhaps they don't have access to that pediatrician that you might have 15, 16, 20 years of knowledge with them. And so I think it's so important that we support and lift up organizations that give that to people who don't have access to it. And I think that's very important as well, because it was easier. I always like to say it's not easy, but it was easier because I knew that we had each other. And even though it was really difficult, and yes, if you listen to our earlier podcast, what do you say, episode 74 or something?
72.
You might want to go back and listen to that, because I think there's some other good stuff in there too. But we think about what was that like back then and what did we talk about in terms of going to counseling, that was a part of that. And we had access to that too. And so I think it's so important that we help people to navigate this massively complex healthcare, mental health care systems that are available to them today, because they may not have somebody there with them to walk along that journey. So it's important that we get them access to that too.
I'll be remiss if we didn't mention, obviously, Hand to Hold is the one who produces this podcast. They're a nonprofit here, headquartered in Austin, but nationwide. And it was really, they were coming about just as we had our NICU baby. The founder was our mentor and has continued to be so. Kelly has been amazing for our family. But the resources that they provide, all of which are at no cost to families, are so much more robust now than they were back in 2009. And that's because they work and they have programs for dads as well as moms. So it's not just the moms that benefit. So I do believe that there's some resources out there. So maybe I would encourage people, like, talk to your social worker, talk to your NICU nurse, talk to your developmental pediatrician or your pediatrician, your OB-GYN, and say what's available in my particular community and what's available nationwide, because I'm fairly certain there are definitely nationwide programs, but I'm fairly certain that there are some local programs specific maybe to your hospital or to where you gave birth that can really provide some support and figuring out, like, stringing out what's real, what's not real, what's filtered, what's not filtered, and how do we make the best decision for our family. Man, I could ask you so many more questions, but that just means I'll just have to have you back. What would be your best advice, babe, to someone who feels like they want to share their story with their child, but they're feeling overwhelmed about how to share it, when to share it, and who to share it with?
Yeah, certainly it's going to be up to each individual's, their own needs, desires, their family. What are they, private or more private, less private? So it's going to be their decision. But I think one thing that really comes to mind that I'm kind of reminded of quite often is people. There are great humans in this world. There are great people, and they want to support you. And so I think by sharing your story in some way, whether it's a post on a social media app, or it's a journal maybe that you share with others, or whatever that is for you, I think allowing people into your story is very important, because people can now pray for you. They can bring you meals. You maybe talked about this. They can bring you underwear to the hospital if you need it. Maybe that's another story for another time on another podcast episode. But I know it happened and it's true. But I think it's important that you let people into your life. And so I think by sharing your story to some degree is it's an important part of the human existence. And I think it's important. And I think there are great people out there who care deeply about other people, and they want to help other people who are in times of distress, despair, anxiety, fear. And so I think that's what I would say to people. If you're thinking about kind of sharing your story, do it. Let people into the story and let people help you.
You made me tear up. I'm going to talk about you in the 2-minute take, but thank you for, as always, a good conversation. I'll see you for dinner tonight, but thanks, babe, for your insight and for going back all the way 14 years ago. Hopefully some of that advice helps some other parents.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thanks for having me on. And, I'm a pretty easy guest, so look me up anytime. I'm happy to help out. And grateful to Kelly and Hand to Hold as well. I think tremendous organization and tremendous resources for people who need it.
Well, now that Mr. Whitaker made me tear up towards the end of that, how about I just give you the rest of the story in today's 2-minute take? So when I gave birth to our 5th baby, my 4 previous pregnancies had just been regular deliveries, vaginal deliveries. And we realized very quickly into inducing labor with him that it was going to be an emergency C-section. And providentially, I never actually had anyone in the delivery room or anyone even at the hospital with me except for my husband, Scott. But this particular time, our son's godmother was there. And so Melanie was there, and she had 4 C-sections. She was pregnant with her 5th baby when I was giving birth, and she was getting ready. She was preparing for her 5th C-section. And man, she was a total gift to me in getting me prepared for that delivery. Well, a few days later, of course, I'm discharged and I've never had a C-section. And lo and behold, Melanie rolls up to the hospital and she had granny underwear for me. And I started weeping. It was probably the hormones, but I started weeping in the hospital because how many people can bring you underwear and they just know that's what you need? And Melanie knew that's what I needed. And I think Scott's point of inviting people into your suffering, inviting people into your story, you know what it does? It allows people to love you. We often want to shield the world or our families from hard things. And while I do think that there are some things that are TMI, y'all know what those are, but there are many more times that we could invite them into our suffering and we're afraid. And it was my experience with our NICU baby and that beautiful outpouring of love and granny underwear from Walmart from my amazing friend Melanie that let me know that when I invite people into that place, they can love me well. So I hope that that is your encouragement to find whatever balance it is. Seek out and share your story in whatever way you feel called to do, but it can be a really beautiful experience when done well and when done out of great love. So we have even more amazing episodes, but I think it's worth saying, I can't believe this is our 100th episode, and what a joy it was to have my very, very, very favorite guest ever on the show with me. So don't go anywhere. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast. You can do that over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can give us a rating or review. We love those, by the way. And you can always watch us over on YouTube. That's a fun little thing that you can do. But don't go anywhere, because next time we're going to be talking about this.
People think of your core as just your abs, but if you think of like a soda can, that whole thing is a canister, right? Our core kind of looks the same way. It's a canister. And so it's not just your abs on the front, your pelvic floor from the bottom is included in that. So when we talk about the pelvic floor, we really just mean that bundle of muscles, but pelvic floor PTs and pelvic health in general encompasses a lot more than just the pelvic floor muscles.
That would explain why sometimes you have pain in other places. And then when you go to a PT, you're like, oh, that solved that problem. I didn't know that.
Anybody who's been in PT knows that where the pain is not always where the problem is. Yeah, exactly.
It's never where the pain is never where the problem is.